Thank you very much for listening to this week's talk on the Sedra of Re'eh. And Re'eh is the fourth Sedra in the book of Devarim, the book of Deuteronomy, the fourth out of 11 Sedras. And we are dedicating this learning to the safe and speedy release of all of the hostages in Gaza and the safety and success of all of the soldiers in the IDF. And the events that we are going through today and the application that we can find and the guidance that we can find in the words of the Torah are always so perfectly opposite. And I feel as we're living through, we look at the words, the opening words of the Sedra, which begins Re'eh, see, Anochi nosein lifnechem hayom bracha uklala. Today, see, I am giving to you today a blessing and a curse. And the questions often asked, it's not necessarily something that one sees as a tangible object. So perhaps in our religion we are more used to the concept of Shema, listen to the blessings, listen to the curses. But this has a tangible effect. And I reflected that we often see the sense of sight on the one hand is our yardstick of witnessing, and we have a saying that one cannot compare seeing to hearing, that when you actually see something for yourself, that is a more significant experience in certain ways. However, it is also very misleading, and as we look at our challenges today and the different responses that people have, how we can all be so desperate to see the safe and speedy release of all of the hostages, yet certain people will pursue a course of action that they think is the right course of action, and other people will say, no, how can you possibly do that? That's completely the wrong course. And each of the opposing views are seeing things with the clarity that they see a physical object in front of them. And that is the point and the problem, because just like we can have a mirage of an oasis that we are absolutely sure that we are seeing an object, yet it turns out to be just a shimmering illusion. So too, when we use the human sense of sight as the only measure, then we are prone to making mistakes. So how can we possibly have that deep clarity that we need in order to see the blessing, to see the course of action that is a good one, or to see the course of action that is wrong and that is considered the curse? And I think that we need to look at the concluding words of the previous Sedra of Akev that we read past Shabbos. And this is the sort of the Maftir section, which is chapter 11, verses 22 to 25. For if you will always be careful to keep these commandments which I am commanding you to keep, to love God, your God, to follow all his ways, and to cleave to him, then God will drive out all these nations from before you, and you will take over nations that are greater and stronger than you. Every place upon which the soles of your feet will tread will be yours. Your boundary will be from the desert and the Lebanon, and from the river, the Euphrates River, until the western sea. No man will stand before you. God, your God, will cast the fear and dread of you upon all the land where you will tread, just as he said to you. And then after a midline break, so it's not a new section, it is literally like a subsection, we then go to Re'eh. So I think that we have the first hint as to how we can actually see when we look back at the prophecy, when we look back that in order to overcome the possibility that something that we see is actually a mirage, we need to look at the words of the Torah. We need to follow the words of Hashem. We need to love Hashem. We need to fear Hashem. And then the prophecies and the promises will come true. And I think that is the answer, in a way, to this question of how can I overcome being duped by something that is not actually real, even though it looks real to me. And the rabbis learn from this section the way that Hashem is saying, choose. See, I have given before you a blessing and a curse. And then later on in the book of Devarim, and then this Hashem gives us life and death, and he says, choose life. And the rabbis formulate from these ideas the principle of what is referred to as Bechira Chofshis, which is translated as freedom of choice. And this is the groundbreaking philosophy that we can make choices. And I say groundbreaking because there is a lot of neurological evidence, and this is we find it first in the Torah, in the Talmud, that actually a lot of things in our lives are completely predetermined. So things that we can identify easily, like where we are born, when we are born, into which family we are born, all of these things which have a huge impact on the choices we make are beyond our choice. And therefore, how can we actually say that there is such a thing as freedom of choice? But the fact that there is such a thing as freedom of choice is a fundamental principle of Judaism. And although in his 13 principles of faith, the famous rabbi and doctor Maimonides, who lived in the 12th century. He was born in Cordoba in 1138, and he passed away in Fostat, Cairo in 1204. And he is buried in Tiberias. And in these 13 principles of faith, which we can say every day at the end of the Shacharis prayer, it does not actually include the principle of freedom of choice. But when we have one of the principles of faith is the idea of reward and punishment. So we are rewarded for the good things that we do, and we are punished for the way that we observe the Torah, and punished when we do not observe the Torah. So if we didn't have the freedom to choose to either observe or not observe, we couldn't possibly be held accountable. So embedded into this principle of reward and punishment, the rabbis learn that this is where the Rambam indirectly includes the concept that we have the freedom of choice. And although many neuroscientists will point out to neurological development in the fetus and say that from 20 weeks of gestation, when a fetus is in the womb, 20 weeks, then neural pathways are being laid down which will influence decisions such as what we eat and who we marry. So far beyond the color of our eyes and hair and skin, decisions that we're going to make, which are already laid down in the womb. So we have that view, but that is not the Torah view. And the Torah view is emphatically, and this is stated in the following way in the Gemara, that everything comes from heaven, hakol min hashamayim, chutz miyiras shamayim, besides, except for the fear of God. So with that choice of whether we are going to, when we understand fear in the context of being in awe of Hashem, of the more we are learning, the more we are exposing ourselves to the practices, to the mitzvahs, to the wisdom of the Torah, in terms of what we fill our heads with, how we fill our lives really, and how much we allow the Torah into our lives to impact on us. So that is going to build up our levels of the sense of awe, which is another way of understanding this word yirah, as opposed to a trembling type of fear. And this is the way that we make these choices. And in a book called Insights and Attitudes, Rav Herschel Schachter writes an article on this concept of what we call Bechira Choshis, which is freedom of choice. And he points out that when we talk about Bechira, choosing, it's interesting that, for example, in Ivrit, in modern Hebrew, that when we have elections, they're called Bechirot. And coming from the word choose, that you choose, you have certain options, and you choose where you put your X on the ballot paper, or whatever is the means of registering your vote. However, the Rambam in his discussion on this matter, he doesn't call it Bechira Chovshis, he calls it Rishus. Now, Rishus means authority. It is a word capable of different translations, but among others, it is a higher level. So when we, on the lower level, think about freedom of choice, it's as if I have the option to do one thing or the option to do another thing, and I choose between these two options. And we're used to perhaps simplistically thinking about that as it applies to us as human beings. But Rambam is actually saying that we as human beings are created in the image of God. And in that capacity, that we have an inkling of the fact that Hashem created, when we talk about the creation of the world, it's this idea of yesh me'ayin, that Hashem alone can create something from absolutely nothing. When human beings create, they may refine, improve, but they are effectively working with material that they already have. So when the first human beings made bread, for example, then they or discovered the process of sourdough, they already had the flour and the water, and they were able to deduce that they could ferment that and cause it to rise, etc. But they were working with existing materials. And this is not a way that we normally associate with human beings. However, when it comes to these high-level spiritual choices, human beings are actually able to emulate Hashem in this capacity of being able to choose something for nothing. And the specific example that Rav Shachter uses to illustrate in this situation is that someone can choose. They are born into a completely non-observant background, and they can choose. They can, I suppose we could look at Avraham Avinu as the original version and the model of someone who has done that. Born into a completely idolatrous society. He had had no exposure. He hadn't gone to yeshiva. Nobody had taught him. There were no role models besides an idolatrous society, or a father who owned a shop that sold, according to the Medrash, these idols. So where on earth could he have possibly come to understand that there is a world, there is a creator, and everything that is in this world is part of the creation and the creator, and this is the foundation of a moral code that we are accountable, and this is what we base our lives on. So in that way, Avraham Avinu, Avraham our father, was able to create something yesh me'ayin, something from nothing. And this is the use of the word rishus is giving us this hint, this possibility of, in a way, a completely different perspective to the neurological science that will tell us no, our neural pathways are already formed in the womb. Yet we're saying no, a human being has that capacity to, even though they are not exposed to the truth, they can still come to choose to recognize the truth. And I think that this message that we read in the Sedra of this Shabbos is so appropriate. It's so appropriate as we're navigating the challenges today to use the concluding paragraph of last week's Sedra to give us the guide, the path of how to overcome the illusions that sometimes physical sight will give us. And then we are able to really get into that that place of connection to Hashem and see what beneath the surface, see what is real, see what is true, and how we need that sense to be working in this way as we are going to be approaching the month of Elul. Rosh Chodesh Elul is going to be Sunday and Monday, so straight after Shabbos. And this is going to be our preparation for Rosh Hashanah. This is the countdown to Rosh Hashanah. And so from the Sedra of Ro'eh, we are being given the idea that we can have 2020 vision when we reference the Torah as our guidebook, and we see beyond the illusions, we see to the truth, and we let that inform our behavior and set us off on the path to an Elul that is a meaningful preparation for the coming new year. And may that be a good and blessed year for all of the nation of Israel and all of the world. Wishing everyone Shabbat Shalom.